Little Johnny's grandfather was something of a philosopher and never missed an opportunity to give out a little bit of sage advice to his grandson. "Yes, sirree, Johnny," he said one day, "always remember, fools are certain, but wise people hesitate." "Are you sure, Grandpa?" asked Johnny. "Oh, yes," said his grandfather. "I'm absolutely certain." I'm absolutely certain. How many times have you ever said that? And how many times have you ever been right? And how many times have you been wrong? May 13th, 2013, a day that will live in infamy. Game 7, Toronto versus Boston, first round of the playoffs. With 5 minutes left in the game, Toronto was winning 4-1. Will they win? I'm absolutely certain, cried every Leaf fan around the world. That's all I'm going to say about that story. To begin this sermon series today on the topic of new ways of thinking about our faith, I want to look at the topic of certainty. Being certain about things, being able to count on things, being sure of things. How much do you value certainty in your life? My guess is you value it a lot. I know that I do. If I'm making dinner for my family and they say they'll be home for 6 p.m. and they get home at 7 p.m. and wonder why the food's in the garbage and I'm in a bad mood. If I'm supposed to be paid on a certain day in the month, I don't want to get a phone call saying, "We can't pay you this month, but maybe we can pay you next month." If I booked a vacation to a luxury resort on a beach on a Cuban beach, I don't want to be told that they've lost my reservation, but they can find me a room in the Motel 6 in downtown Havana. We like certainty. We need certainty. And so often we crave certainty. And when we count on something and it's not there or it doesn't happen, it can make us feel kind of anxious. In this long pandemic that we've gone through, I think I can say there's only been one time when I was truly frightened. It was the first time I went to a grocery store after the first lockdown way back in March, and the shelves were nearly empty. Maybe you had that same experience. And I felt a sense of panic because one of the certainties in my life was suddenly taken away from me. That being that I would always have access to food when I needed it. I had visions of us huddled together a few days from then playing rock, paper, scissors to see who gets to eat the final piece of bread. I remember coming home with boxes of random frozen food, just in case this was indeed the end of the world. I think a lot of it's still in the freezer, just in case the day comes when we may want to actually eat frozen chunks of codfish. We like certainty. But honestly, what can you be certain about in your life? If you were to make a list, what would you put on that list? Well, I never like to ask anything of anyone that I wouldn't ask of myself, so I asked myself that question and thought about what I would put on that list. What am I absolutely certain about? So I started, I'm certain the sun will come up tomorrow. Well, I can't imagine a reason why it never would, but can I be 100% certain about that? Maybe not. I'm certain that I'll always have a job. I don't know. Some weeks I think I'm one bad joke away from getting fired around here. I'm certain that if I buy a lottery ticket, I'm not going to win that $60 million jackpot. Then again, someone has to win. So my list got shorter and shorter and shorter until there was just one thing on it. Just one thing in life that I'm certain about. That one day I will expire. I will be no more. I know, how depressing is that? Death and taxes, the only certainty in life. Wasn't that what Benjamin Franklin once said? We all long for certainty. But if you stop and think about it, it's actually a very elusive thing. But what we also discovered recently, on Wednesday, January 6th, to be exact, is not only can it be an elusive thing, it can be a very dangerous thing. We all saw what happened at the Capitol building in the U.S. And at various times, reporters would stop someone in the crowd and ask why they were doing what they were doing in storming the Capitol. And what struck me in their response was not necessarily the words, but the look in their eyes. In their eyes was a fervor, a zealousness, a passion born of certainty. And the words that tumbled out of their mouths were almost exactly the same with each person. This election was stolen from Donald Trump, and we're here to take back our country. These people weren't playing around. There was no gray zone, no idea that they could be wrong. Just an unbending, unwavering certainty in their own bias and their own beliefs. We are right, you are wrong, and we are going to do what we need to do to right that wrong, even if it's violent, even if it puts people's lives at risk, even if it means that we end up in jail. We are going to act from our certainty. The irony, of course, being is that all the evidence points to the fact that despite their certainty, they were wrong. They were 100% wrong. But it doesn't matter, because certainty is not a litmus test for truth. Those two words are not synonyms. Certainty at best is simply one's perspective on truth. At worst, it's in fact the bending of the truth, sometimes the rejection of truth, to prop up our own ideas or biases or assumptions. Speaking of certainty and truth, I read a really funny story recently that's actually very true. A guy in Spain recently won the lottery, and he was asked why he won. And he said it was thanks to God. He said God gave him the final two numbers to put on his lottery ticket as a sign. He said for 7 nights, he had a dream of the number 7. So he multiplied them together and got the final number, 48. And that's what he wrote on the ticket, and he won. The joke, of course, is that 7 times 7 is 49, which would have been the wrong number. But he thought it was 48. That was his sign from God. He wrote it down, and he won. Either God isn't great at math either, or thought this was a wonderfully funny story that would make us all laugh. But that's the thing about certainty. It is not synonymous with truth. We can be absolutely as certain about something, but we can be miles from the truth. We can be sure that 7 times 7 is 48, when in fact it's 49. So let me tell you where I'm going with this. And forgive me if you follow me on Facebook, because a little bit of this I posted earlier this week. But like you, I was utterly shocked by what happened in the U.S. on January the 6th, the storming of the Capitol. And I'm actually taping this service on Thursday, but you're watching it on Sunday, and I dearly hope that between those days nothing else happened. Anyway, responsibility for that and for any future such acts of terror really rests at the feet of those who lit the fire with their angry rhetoric. And you know who those people are. I don't need to say their names here. But if you take away the talking heads, the angry speeches, the mob mentality, could you not say that what is really being judged in all of this is the concept of certainty itself? The philosopher Bertrand Russell once said this: "The whole problem with the world is fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, while the wise are full of doubts." There's a lot of truth in that. But there is a need in all of us to be certain about things. And when we feel we are, we hold on to that certainty like a dog holding on to a bone. And we're not quick to back down, even when confronted with the truth. So where does this need come from? Well, anthropologists will tell us, like so many of our human attributes, both good and not so good, the need for certainty has its roots in our evolutionary history. Early humans lived in a dangerous and a cruel world where there was little room for gray zone thinking. If you saw a saber-toothed tiger running towards you and all you had was a wooden spear in your hand, you had to be absolutely certain that you could take out that tiger before he took you out, or you had to be absolutely certain that you were close enough to your cave that you could outrun him back to safety. There was no wiggle room. The need for certainty was a survival skill. The philosopher cave dweller who maybe took time to ponder the greater truths around hand-to-hand combat with a meat-eating tiger found themselves pretty quickly booted out of the evolutionary chain of command. We are the products of our ancestral roots. Certainty feeds that evolutionary part of our brain that we inherited from early humans. And if you don't think it does, put yourself in this scenario. Have you ever played Trivial Pursuit and someone gets a question that they can't answer, but you know the answer to it? You're absolutely certain of the answer, and how do you feel? You're probably waving your hand in the air saying, I know it, and your body floods itself with that good hormone, and when you answer that question, how do you feel? You feel emboldened and confident, maybe even a little bit smug. I'm so smart. We have a primal need to be right and to be certain. Reminds me of a conversation that the preacher Charles Spurgeon had with a member of his church who was told him that she believed that the earth existed on the back of a turtle. Okay, said the minister. Tell me this, what's the turtle standing on? Oh, she said, standing on another turtle. Okay, what's that turtle standing on? Standing on another turtle. Well, what's that turtle? She cut him off. She said, forget about it, Reverend. It's turtles all the way down. We have an evolutionary need to be right and to be certain. And we don't necessarily like that certainty to be questioned. But it's even more than that. We also have a social need for certainty. Certainty makes us feel grounded in a world that is often confusing. Certainty about things gives us a rudder in the stormy seas of life and makes us feel like we're not alone. And so we seek out others who share our beliefs, which then reinforces them and makes us feel part of a larger movement or a larger community. As sick as it may seem to us watching it, I'm sure for those in the mob on Capitol Hill, there was a sense of social connection and well-being, as they were no longer a lone voice crying out in the wilderness. They were an important cog in a bigger machine that was spewing out its beliefs in a unified voice. For many of those people who perhaps always felt alone, they were alone no longer. And that certainty emboldened and encouraged them. What was on display in those Capitol Hill riots was a perfect example of the dangers of certainty. But in the end, that certainty, which fueled their primal brains, reinforced their social connections, was not true. And it led them to a dark and dangerous place. Again, here's where I'm going with this, finally. As we begin this series of Out of the Ashes, looking at new ways of understanding and articulating our faith, the first place we have to stop at requires us to struggle with this notion of certainty. Because unfortunately, one thing the history of our faith has shown us is the biggest barrier keeping us from fresh ways of looking at things is this deference we give to certainty. For all the good the church has done and is doing, for all the good that our Christian faith has done and is doing, there have been times when the church's certainty has led them down some very dark paths. Perhaps you saw the truly heartbreaking story out of Ireland this week. For decades in the later 19th and early 20th century, the church ran homes for unwed mothers. Its justification was the moral imperative that it was a sin to have sexual relations outside of marriage. These mothers who were shamed by their communities were shipped off to these homes, and upon giving birth, their children were taken away from them. As bad as that was, it gets even worse. The children were usually neglected, and they died by the hundreds. They were buried in mass graves on the grounds of these homes. This isn't some right-wing despotic government doing this. This was the Christian church, acting from its own moral certainty that it was right and justified in its actions. I know that's an extreme example, but for much of its history, the church has taught that there's one path, based on one book, based on one interpretation of that book, that it was the truth, It was absolutely certain, and you could count on it. And we did. And often we still do. How many people were taught in Sunday school that this is the way, the only way, and the certain way? The church has always used as its currency this idea of certainty and have made buying into it a requirement of its followers. And we did, even if at times it made us uncomfortable. How many people secretly felt guilty because they may have questioned something that they learned, but they didn't raise that question for fear of being wrong or judged? How many people grew up believing that faith was all about towing the line, being good, and avoiding doing wrong? How many people who, when they did do wrong, carried with them, perhaps still carry with them, a tremendous amount of guilt or shame? How many people who, when presented by it with different ideas from a different place, felt that they had to choose between their faith and other ideas that they were being taught, that it was either or? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you may be a victim of the church's requirement upon you for certainty. Here's the greatest irony in all of that. The church that gave its message of unquestioned, unwavering certainty was based on the life of Jesus. If you read your Bible carefully, you'll find that Jesus actually preached and lived against the idea of moral certainty. Jesus had one consistent nemesis throughout his life, one group he constantly questioned and criticized. Guess who they were? The Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? The ones who promoted a strict, moral, unquestioning interpretation of the faith of that time. They were the morality police, so certain that they were right and you were wrong. They were waiting for you to slip up so that they could punish you. And they did, often very harshly. How do we know that Jesus had a problem with this? Because there are incidents time and time again when he confronted them and questioned them, including the one that I read today. When a man needed to be healed and Jesus wanted to heal him, but it was the Sabbath, the Pharisee says, you can't heal on the Sabbath because you can't work on the Sabbath, and that would be considered work. Moral certainty. And Jesus said, forget that. There's a bigger issue at play. And he went and healed the man. If we want to follow the moral certainty of the church, we can do so. If we want to follow the example of Jesus, then we have a right, even a responsibility, to question moral certainty. I want to share with you a quote, and I'm going to put it on the screen so you can read it yourself. It's not an easy quote to read, but there's a lot to think about in this quote. It's by H.L. Mencken. This is what he said. Moral certainty is actually a sign of cultural inferiority. The more uncivilized the person, the surer he or she is that he or she knows precisely what is right and what is wrong. All human progress, even in morals, has been the work of those who have questioned the current values, not of those who have whooped them up and tried to enforce them. The truly civilized person is always skeptical and tolerant, in this field as in all others. Their culture is based on, I am not too sure. Did I just blow your mind? Is he saying in that quote that values and morals are not important? Not at all. They're vitally important. But what he's saying is that we constantly have to look at them, reevaluate them, and consider if they're holding us back as an enlightened civilization. And we must never, ever use our moral certainty to beat down, belittle, or harm another individual or group. And friends, that's exactly what Jesus taught over and over again to the Pharisees, to the keepers of moral certainty. Are you serious I can't heal this man because it's the Sabbath? There's a bigger principle at stake than your moral certainty. Are you serious that I can't eat this food because it's morally wrong? There's a bigger principle at stake than your moral certainty. Jesus wasn't questioning the morals and values of his time because he was immoral or without values, but because he saw a bigger picture. And when morals or values no longer fall into that bigger picture, they deserve, in fact, they must be questioned. Could you imagine if even one person in Ireland had questioned the moral certainty of those who took those children from their mothers? Here's the good news in this. What is the bigger picture? It was love. I would argue that for Jesus, that was his moral certainty, the power of love. When we shift in our life from the need to be right to the need to be loving, everything shifts with us. And I believe that we inch a little closer to enlightenment. History's greatest despots, every single one of them, including the one in the White House today, have been driven by their own sense of right and wrong, their own moral certainty, as twisted as it may be. And in every case, in every single one, it's resulted in their and their own followers' destruction. And it's resulted in the world being a darker place. On the other hand, every single enlightened person that has walked this earth, Jesus, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Buddha, the Dalai Lama, have been driven not by moral certainty, but by love. And in every case, it's resulted in humanity taking a step closer to achieving its enlightenment. It's pushed away darkness and appealed to the light within us all. It's made us better people because love speaks with a different voice. Certainty says things like, "You are a sinner. You must be punished." Love says, "You made a mistake, and I'll help you get back on track." Certainty says, "There are rules. Follow them or else." Love says, "There's only one rule. Love your neighbor as yourself. Follow it to your own betterment." Certainty says, Christianity is the only way to God. Love says, there's goodness and godliness in people of all different traditions and backgrounds. Certainty says, I am right and I'm going to prove it to you. Love says, I am light and I'm going to reveal it to you. I would argue that without a doubt, Jesus' greatest legacy that he leaves for us is the legacy of love. And he shows us that the way to achieve that legacy is to have the courage to reject the Pharisees of our day. Reject those who want to peddle in certainty. Reject those who tell you that they have the truth all figured out. Reject those who want to believe the path to heaven is paved in rules. Reject those who want to tell you that they are right and you are wrong. Reject those who tell you that you have no right to question. Reject those who tell you that their moral certainty is the path to God. For their certainty is just that, their certainty. It's not necessarily truth. It is at best an illusion. At worst, it is the force that can awaken the potential for darkness in us all, which, as we have seen, can lead to places we would not otherwise go, to do things we would not otherwise do. Instead, in these stormy seas of uncertainty, grasp hold of the life preserver called love. For love truly has only one purpose: to bring out the best in you and to bring out the best in those around you. While certainty locks us down, love does exactly the opposite. It opens us up. Love is expansive. Love is encouraging. Love is inviting. Love is enlightening. Love doesn't say, I am right. It says, I am here. Love doesn't require us to think in a certain way. It invites us to act in a certain way. Love gives the sinner a second chance, the marginalized a voice, the lonely a hand, the broken healing, the disbelieving faith, the worried hope. And it always, always appeals to the very best in us and enlarges the circle of light. Let me end with this thought today. In the Russian novel The Brothers Karamazov, written by Dostoevsky, a woman comes to talk to a holy man about her problems with faith. What if, she said, what if I've been believing all my life, and when I come to die there is nothing but flowers growing over my grave? How can I prove it? How can I prove there is a God? And the holy man answered her, by the experience of love. The deeper you love, the surer you will grow to know that there is a God, for that God is love itself. Amen.